The Wyoming frontier was silent in a way that felt unnatural, too quiet, too still. Snow stretched endlessly across the plains, swallowing fences, trails, and any sign of civilization. Jack Miller had lived alone out here for years, a hardened cowboy who trusted his horse more than people. His log cabin sat miles from the nearest town, built for survival, not comfort. Winter nights were the worst. The cold crept through the walls like something alive. That night the wind screamed louder than usual, rattling the shutters and forcing snow through every crack. Jack returned late from checking his traps, his boots heavy with ice. He threw another log on the fire, rubbed his aching hands together, and collapsed onto his narrow bed. Exhaustion pulled him under fast. Out here, sleep came like a weapon, sudden and unavoidable. Sometime after midnight, Jack stirred. At first he thought it was the wind again. Then he felt it warmth, not from the fire, from behind him. His eyes snapped open. Someone was breathing in the room. Jack froze, every muscle locked. His cabin was sealed. No doors creaked, no windows broken. Yet he could feel another presence close enough to feel body heat. Slowly, carefully, he turned his head. By the faint glow of a hanging lantern, he saw her. A young woman stood near the foot of his bed, wrapped tightly in a thin, damp blanket. Snow melted from her dark hair, dripping onto the wooden floor. Her skin was pale from cold, her lips slightly blue. Her eyes, sharp, dark, alert, never left his. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Instead, she raised one trembling hand and whispered, "Please don't shout." Her voice was weak but steady. Jack sat up slowly, hands visible, mind racing. He recognized her immediately, not personally, but by her features, her clothing, the beaded cord at her wrist. She was Apache. Out here, that meant danger, for both of them. "I was freezing," she said quietly. "Your fire, I followed the smoke." Jack glanced at the door, still barred. He hadn't heard it open. She must have slipped in while he slept, driven by desperation stronger than fear. Outside, the storm howled like it was trying to bury the world. Jack stood and grabbed his coat, holding it out to her. "Sit by the fire," he said, voice low. "You're safe, but you scared the life out of me." She hesitated, then moved slowly, keeping distance. As she warmed her hands, Jack noticed how thin she was, how exhausted. This wasn't a threat. This was survival. Still, one thought chilled him more than the snow. If she was here, others would come. And when they did, this quiet cabin would become the center of a storm far deadlier than winter itself. Morning came slowly, dragged in by a pale gray sky that looked heavy with more snow. Jack hadn't slept. Not really. He sat near the dying fire, sharpening a knife he hoped he wouldn't need, listening to the steady rhythm of breathing behind him. The Apache woman, Yana, slept on the far side of the cabin, wrapped in his coat, curled like someone who had learned how to survive without comfort. At dawn, she woke instantly, as if her body was trained for danger. Her eyes went to the door first, then the window. Her face tightened. Jack followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. Footprints. Fresh, dozens of them. They circled the cabin like a tightening rope, boots, moccasins, horse tracks pressed deep into the snow. Whoever made them had arrived silently, deliberately. Jack counted at least 30. Yana whispered, "They found me." Jack exhaled slowly. He'd known this was coming. Out here, no one traveled alone without consequence. Smoke from a cabin could be seen for miles, and Apache trackers didn't miss signs, especially not when one of their own was lost in a storm. Jack pulled on his coat and hat. "Stay back," he said gently. "Let me talk first." Yana grabbed his sleeve. "They won't listen." "Then I'll make them," Jack replied, though his voice betrayed him. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and unforgiving. 30 Apache warriors stood among the trees, rifles and bows ready, faces calm but deadly serious. Horses shifted in the snow behind them. At the center stood a tall man with streaks of paint across his face, clearly the leader. Jack raised both hands. I didn't take her, he said loudly. She came here to live. The storm would have killed her. The leader studied him in silence, eyes like stone. Then he spoke, measured, controlled. She belongs to her people. Iana stepped forward despite Jack's warning. I belong to myself, she said. The warriors stirred. Jack's heart pounded. This wasn't just about shelter anymore. This was about pride, honor, and bloodlines older than the land he stood on. The leader's gaze shifted to Iana. You should not be here. I would be dead if I wasn't, she replied. Silence fell heavier than the snow. Jack took a step forward. I gave her food, fire, nothing else. You have my word. The leader looked at Jack longer this time, searching for something, fear, deception, weakness. What he found instead seemed to surprise him. Honor. Finally, the leader raised a hand, weapons lowered but not fully. She stays, the leader said, until the sun rises again tomorrow. Then we decide. The warriors backed away slightly, forming a distant perimeter. Jack released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. As the door closed, Iana looked at him, not with fear but with something deeper. Gratitude mixed with warning. Because both of them knew this was only a pause. The real decision, the one that could cost lives, had not yet been made. The knock came just before noon. Not loud, not aggressive. 3 firm taps against the cabin door, controlled, confident, deliberate. Jack looked at Iana. She stiffened instantly, her jaw set, eyes darkening with recognition. It's him, she whispered. The leader. Jack nodded and reached for the door, pausing only long enough to straighten his coat and take a steady breath. Whatever happened next would define how this ended. He opened the door wide. The Apache leader stepped inside alone. He was taller than Jack expected, broad-shouldered, carrying himself with the calm authority of someone who never had to raise his voice. Snow dusted his boots. His eyes moved quickly, taking in the cabin, the fire, the bed, the weapons on the wall, the small signs of how Jack lived. Then his gaze settled on Iana. She stood tall, though Jack could see tension in her shoulders. The leader spoke to her first in their native tongue. His voice was low, but the words carried weight. Iana responded quietly, firmly. Jack didn't understand the language, but he understood the tone. This wasn't an argument. It was a reckoning. The leader turned to Jack. You live alone, he said, not a question. I do, Jack replied. You could have sent her away. She would have frozen. The leader studied Jack's face for a long moment. Many men would have taken advantage. Jack didn't flinch. Many men aren't me. The fire popped loudly between them. The leader's eyes flicked to the bed, then back to Jack. Nothing happened. Jack shook his head. I gave her warmth, that's all. Silence followed. The leader removed his gloves and warmed his hands by the fire, an unexpected gesture that loosened the tension just slightly. You understand what it means, he said, for one of ours to be here. Jack nodded. I do now. Iana spoke again, her voice stronger this time. She faced the leader fully. I chose to stay. He did not force me. The leader listened carefully, then closed his eyes briefly, as if weighing more than just words. When he opened them, he looked older, tired even. Our people survive because we choose wisely, he said. The storm does not care about honor, but we must. He turned back to Jack. You will keep her safe. You will show restraint. If you fail, there will be consequences. Jack met his gaze. I give you my word. The leader nodded once. Outside, the warriors shifted. The tension in the air changed, not gone but redirected. She stays until the snow breaks, the leader said. After that, she decides. Iana's breath caught. Jack felt his chest tighten, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what had just been placed in his hands. The leader stepped back toward the door, pausing once more. Know this, Cowboy, he said. The land watches how men behave when no one else is looking. Then he was gone. The door closed softly behind him. Yana exhaled, her strength finally wavering. Jack stayed silent, staring at the fire. Because now he understood. This was no longer about a storm. It was about choices, and the kind of man he would be remembered as. Night fell slowly, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The sun disappeared behind the hills, leaving the cabin wrapped in deep blue shadows. Jack added more logs to the fire, the crackling sound filling the heavy silence. Outside, the Apache warriors had not left. Their presence could be felt even when unseen, horses shifting, quiet movement between the trees, the sense of eyes always watching. Yana sat near the fire, knees pulled close, staring into the flames. She looked calmer than before, but Jack could tell it was a practiced calm, the kind learned from years of danger. Neither spoke for a long time. "You didn't have to do that," she finally said. "Stand between me and them." Jack shrugged slightly, didn't feel like much of a choice. She looked at him then. "Out here, every choice matters." The words settled heavily between them. As darkness deepened, the temperature dropped fast. The fire became their only shield against the cold. Jack offered her more blankets and kept his distance, sitting across the room near the door. The memory of how she'd appeared in the night, silent, desperate, freezing, still replayed in his mind. It hadn't been fear that stopped his heart. It had been the realization that even a man who lived alone wasn't truly untouched by others. A sudden sound outside snapped them both to attention. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Jack reached for his rifle but didn't raise it. Through the small window he saw a single shadow pass by. A patrol, watching, testing. The warriors weren't threatening, they were measuring him. Yana stood and moved closer to the fire. "They are waiting to see who you are when no one commands you," she said quietly. Jack stared at the flames. "I've been alone a long time." "Being alone," she replied, "is not the same as being without responsibility." The wind rose again, rattling the cabin walls. Snow tapped against the logs like fingers. Jack realized how small the cabin truly was, not just in size, but in how quickly it had become the center of something far bigger than him. Later, as the fire burned low, Jack lay down on the bed, boots still on. Yana remained near the fire, wrapped tightly, eyes open. Neither slept deeply. Trust was forming, but trust didn't mean comfort yet. In the middle of the night, the fire sputtered. Jack rose to feed it, careful not to wake her. As he moved, he noticed her shivering again. Without a word, he placed another blanket around her shoulders and stepped back. She looked up at him. "You are not what they expected," she said. Jack gave a tired half-smile. "Neither are you." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside the cabin, something fragile held. Not peace, not yet. Understanding. And as the longest night stretched on, both of them knew the hardest part wasn't surviving the cold. It was surviving what came after, when choices could no longer be delayed, and hearts could no longer pretend to be untouched. Dawn arrived without mercy. Cold light spilled across the snow, revealing a world sharpened by ice and silence. Jack stepped outside just after sunrise, his breath rising in thick clouds. The Apache warriors were still there. Some stood near their horses. Others watched from the tree line. None spoke. They didn't need to. Inside the cabin, Yana sat quietly, listening to every sound. Morning always brought clarity and consequences. Jack returned, brushing snow from his coat. "They're waiting," he said. Yana nodded. "So am I." They shared a simple breakfast in silence. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of unspoken thoughts. Jack noticed how different she looked now, stronger, steadier, no longer just someone who had stumbled in from the storm. She belonged to the land as much as the mountains did. A knock came at the door. The leader entered again, this time with two elders behind him. Their faces carried no anger, only gravity. This was not a threat. It was judgment. "You were given the night," the leader said. Now we speak of choice. Iana stood first. She spoke clearly without fear. She told them about the storm, the cold, the smoke she followed, the warmth that saved her life. She spoke of respect, of restraint, of how Jack had treated her as a human being, not a possession. Jack watched, humbled. When she finished, the elders whispered among themselves. Jack felt the weight of every word, every glance. This wasn't about him, but his fate rested in it. The leader turned to Jack. You knew the risk, he said. Why did you let her stay? Jack swallowed. Because leaving her outside would have killed her, and because I couldn't live with that. The leader studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, just slightly. Many men speak of honor, he said. Few live it when no one is watching. The elders nodded. Yana's breath caught as the leader raised his hand. She may stay until the thaw, he declared. After that, she chooses her path freely. Relief washed through the cabin like warmth after a long winter night. But the decision carried weight. The leader stepped closer to Jack. Do not mistake trust for blindness, he warned. We are watching. Jack nodded. I understand. As the warriors began to withdraw, Iana turned to Jack. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. Jack met her eyes. Maybe not, but I wanted to. The sun climbed higher, melting frost from the windows. For the first time since the storm, the cabin felt lighter, not safe, not certain, but honest. Outside, the warriors faded into the trees, leaving silence behind. And in that silence, Jack realized something he hadn't expected. The storm hadn't brought danger into his life. It had brought responsibility. And that, he knew, would change everything. The days began to change. Snow still covered the ground, but it no longer ruled it. The sun lingered longer in the sky, softening the edges of winter. Water dripped from the cabin roof in slow, steady rhythms. Time, once frozen, had started moving again. Jack and Iana settled into a routine. Neither had planned, but both accepted. Mornings were quiet. Jack checked traps while Iana gathered firewood and cleaned the cabin. They spoke little at first, learning each other's rhythms instead of words. Trust grew in small moments. The way Jack always left food for her before eating himself. The way Iana waited by the window until he returned from the forest. The Apache warriors remained nearby, unseen but present. Occasionally, a figure appeared at the edge of the trees, watching, not threatening, observing. Jack felt the weight of it every time he stepped outside. Every action mattered now. One afternoon, while repairing the cabin door, Jack noticed Iana watching him with a thoughtful expression. You are different from how you were the first night, she said. Jack wiped his hands on his coat. So are you. She smiled faintly. Then the land is changing us. They shared a quiet laugh, small but real. As days passed, conversations grew longer. Iana spoke of her people, their traditions, their belief that the land remembered everything. Jack spoke of his past, how he'd come west after losing family, how solitude had felt safer than grief. You chose to be alone, she said gently. Jack nodded. I thought that meant I couldn't hurt anyone else. And now, she asked. He didn't answer right away. Outside, the snow softened underfoot. Tracks no longer stayed forever. Spring was pressing closer. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Iana sat across from Jack, her expression serious. When the thaw comes, she said, I will have to choose. Jack felt the words like a weight in his chest. I know, he replied quietly. She studied him carefully. Does that trouble you? Jack stared into the fire. It scares me more than the storm did. Iana nodded. Then you understand. That night the silence between them felt different. Not empty, charged. They slept on opposite sides of the cabin as always, but awareness lingered like warmth long after the fire died down. Outside the watchers remained, but they saw no cause for alarm. Weeks passed, snow retreated, Earth returned. And in the quiet, something undeniable took shape, not rushed, not forced, but earned. Jack realized he no longer feared being seen. And Ayana realized she no longer feared staying. The land had given them time. Soon it would demand a choice. Spring arrived quietly, almost respectfully. The snow retreated day by day, revealing dark earth beneath, soft, alive, waiting. Streams that had been frozen solid now moved freely, carrying the sound of renewal through the valley. Jack stood outside the cabin one morning, watching water run where ice once ruled, knowing the time he'd been avoiding had finally come. Ayana stood beside him. She had changed, not just in strength but in presence. She moved with confidence now, her eyes steady, her shoulders no longer carrying the weight of fear. The land had restored her, and in doing so had tied her more deeply to this place. The Apache returned that afternoon. Not as a circle, not as a threat. The leader arrived on horseback with a small group of elders, stopping a respectful distance from the cabin. Jack felt his chest tighten, not with panic, but with inevitability. He had known this moment was coming from the first night she stepped into his life. Ayana walked forward before Jack could speak. She faced her people calmly, speaking in her native tongue. Her voice carried across the open land, firm and clear. Jack didn't understand the words, but he understood the courage it took to say them. The leader listened without interrupting. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Wind passed through the grass. Birds called from the trees. Finally, the leader dismounted and stepped closer. "You were given time," he said. "Now the land asks you to choose." Ayana looked back at the cabin, at the firewood stacked neatly by the wall, at the door she had once entered as a stranger. Then she looked at Jack. Not with hesitation. With honesty. "This place saved my life," she said, "and so did he, but my choice is not about debt. It is about where my spirit stands." Jack felt his breath catch. The leader studied Jack one final time. "You have honored our trust," he said. "Few outsiders do." Jack nodded, unable to speak. The elders murmured softly among themselves. The leader raised his hand, and the murmurs stopped. "Your choice will be respected," he told Ayana, "whatever it is." She turned fully toward Jack now. "For a long time," she said quietly, "I believed safety meant returning to what I knew, but sometimes the land shows us another path." Jack swallowed. "You don't owe me anything." She smiled gently. "I know." She stepped forward, placing her hand over her heart. "I choose to stay." The words hung in the air like a promise. The leader watched her closely, then nodded once. "Then this place becomes part of your story." The Apache mounted their horses and began to ride away, leaving no warning, only acceptance. Jack stood in silence as they disappeared into the trees. Ayana turned to him. "Are you afraid now?" Jack exhaled slowly. "More than I've ever been." She smiled. "Good, that means it matters." As the sun dipped lower, Jack realized something profound. The storm had brought her here, but choice had kept her. And tomorrow, for the first time in years, he wouldn't wake up alone. The land grew quiet after the Apache disappeared into the trees. Not the empty kind of quiet, but the kind that settles after something important has been decided. Jack stood beside Ayana, watching the last movement fade into the forest. For the first time since winter, no one was watching. No eyes in the shadows. No judgment hanging in the air. Just choice. Life did not change overnight. The frontier never allowed that. Days still began with work, mending fences, checking traps, preparing for the seasons ahead. But the rhythm was different now. The cabin no longer felt like a shelter meant for one man's survival. It felt lived in, shared. Ayana moved through the space with quiet confidence, respecting the land as if it had always been hers. She helped repair the roof, learned Jack's way of hunting, and shared her own knowledge of plants and weather signs. Together, they prepared for summer, not as strangers bound by a storm, but as partners bound by decision. At night they sat outside beneath the wide American sky, stars stretching endlessly overhead. No rush, no promises spoken aloud. Some things didn't need words. "You don't have to stay forever," Jack said one evening, the firelight flickering between them. "I won't stop you if you change your mind." Yana looked at him for a long moment. "The land changes," she said. "So do people, but staying is also a choice, one I make every day." Jack nodded, understanding more than he ever had. Seasons passed. Spring gave way to summer and the valley bloomed. Travelers occasionally passed through, surprised to find a cabin no longer marked by solitude. They spoke of a cowboy who lived with quiet honor and an Apache woman who walked between worlds without fear. No one spoke of the night she appeared in his bed. Because that night was never about scandal. It was about survival and respect, and the kind of humanity that reveals itself when no one else is watching. The land remembered. Years later, when storms returned, as they always did, Jack would sometimes wake in the night to the sound of wind against the walls. But he never woke alone. And when he reached out, there was warmth, not stolen, not desperate, but freely given. The frontier did not reward recklessness. It rewarded those who listened, those who chose carefully, those who understood that strength was not proven by force, but by restraint. And somewhere beneath the vast American sky, a story remained, of a night when the cold brought a stranger, and a man's heart stopped not from fear, but from realizing he was no longer alone.